Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Steve Harvey, and today I want to talk to you about something every one of us deals with, no matter who you are, how old you are, or how much success you've seen. And that's emotions. Now listen, emotions are real, powerful, they're human. Let me tell you something I had to learn the hard way. You can't let your emotions run your life, because if they do, they'll run your life right into the ground. Emotions are natural, but reactions are a choice. And understanding this truth can transform the way you move through life. Every emotion you feel, anger, joy, frustration, excitement, fear, sadness, comes from a place deep inside you that responds to what's happening around you. These feelings rise up without your permission and without warning. That's because emotions are part of being human. They're built into your mind and body like a heartbeat or a breath. You can't stop them from showing up, and you shouldn't try to. Emotions that tell you something is happening. They alert you, teach you, warn you, and sometimes they motivate you. But just because emotions appear naturally doesn't mean they have to dictate your next move. And that's where the difference lies, your reaction. Reactions are choices. They may not feel like choices in the heat of the moment, but they are. You get to decide what happens after the emotion hits you. You get to decide whether you raise your voice, walk away, take a breath, or let your feelings guide you into something regrettable. Your reaction is part of the process that belongs completely to you. When you understand this, you take back control from your impulses. Most people blame their anger or sadness for their outbursts. But the emotion itself never pulled the trigger. The reaction did. Learning to choose your reaction starts with recognizing that tiny space between feeling and responding. It's small, sometimes just a second, but it's powerful. In that moment, you can slow yourself down, breathe, and think about what outcome you really want. When someone makes you mad, your emotion tells you that a boundary was crossed or something felt wrong. But your reaction decides whether you solve the problem or make it worse. When life disappoints you, your emotion tells you something didn't go as planned. But your reaction decides whether you grow or give up. The emotion is the spark. The reaction is the fire you choose to build or put out. Choosing your reaction doesn't mean hiding your feelings or pretending you're okay. It means acknowledging your emotions, honestly, while still having the discipline to respond with intention. It means realizing you don't have to let temporary feelings create permanent consequences. You can feel deeply and still act wisely. You can be upset without being destructive. You can be hurt without hurting others. That's real strength. The more you practice choosing your reactions, the more power you gain over your life. You start feeling controlled by situations, and you start feeling in control of yourself. You begin to see challenges as moments to rise above instead of moments to fall apart. The truth is, emotions will always show up, but when you understand that your reactions are entirely your own, you step into a level of maturity and freedom that changes everything about the way you live, love, and lead. Self-control begins with self-awareness, because you cannot manage what you do not understand, and you cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. Most world has people go through life reacting on autopilot without ever stopping to ask themselves why they feel what they feel, or why they behave the way they do. They let emotions drive their decisions, habits, and relationships, not realizing that the first step to controlling anything is recognizing it. When you become aware of your inner world, your triggers, your patterns, your strengths, your weaknesses, you gain the power to pause, analyze, and choose differently. Self-awareness acts like a mirror, showing you the truth about yourself without exaggeration or denial. And once you see clearly, you can navigate your emotions instead of being swept away by them. Being self-aware means paying attention to the signals your body and mind send you. Maybe your chest tightens when you're anxious. Maybe your voice gets louder when you're defensive. Maybe your patience disappears when you feel ignored. Most people overlook these clues and jump straight into reacting, but awareness gives you a moment to recognize what's happening inside. That moment is where your control starts. When you notice your irritation rising, you can breathe before snapping. When you notice your disappointment growing, you can choose to reflect instead of shutting down. When you notice jealousy creeping in, you can question it instead of acting on insecurity. Awareness doesn't stop the emotion from coming, but it stops the emotion from taking over. Self-awareness also helps you understand your patterns. If certain people, situations, or words consistently make you angry, insecure, or stressed, that's not random, it's information. Instead of blaming others or assuming life is just hard, awareness lets you examine what's underneath. Maybe you react strongly to criticism because deep down you fear not being enough. Maybe you get defensive because you're used to being misunderstood. Maybe you shut down during conflict because you grew up around yelling. When you see the roots of your reactions, you stop viewing them as personality traits and start viewing them as habits that can be changed. That shift opens the door to real emotional control. Another part of self-awareness is being honest with yourself. Many people avoid looking inward because they don't want to face their flaws, insecurities, or mistakes. But denial only gives emotions more power, while honesty gives you the chance to grow. When you admit to yourself, I get angry too quickly, or I avoid difficult conversations, or I take things too personally, you aren't weakening yourself, you're strengthening your foundation. Honesty creates clarity, and clarity creates control. Self-awareness also requires self-compassion. You cannot understand yourself if you constantly judge yourself. When you approach your emotions with patience rather than punishment, you create space to learn. You start recognizing that emotions are not signs of weakness, they are signals calling for attention. With compassion, you can study your reactions, make adjustments, and practice better habits without shame holding you back. Ultimately, self-awareness is the quiet skill that makes emotional control possible. It's the flashlight in the dark, the pause in the chaos, the understanding beneath the reaction. When you know yourself deeply, you don't just feel your emotions, you guide them. And that guidance becomes the foundation of a stronger, calmer, wiser you. Pausing before responding, finding that quiet moment between what you feel and what you do is one of the most powerful emotional tools a person can develop. Most people underestimate the strength it takes to pause, because reacting instantly feels natural. When emotions come rushing in, anger, frustration, disappointment, or even excitement, your mind wants to move fast. It wants to defend, to explain, to shout, to escape, or to act without thinking. But that first impulse is rarely the wisest one. The pause, it's where your balance lies. It's where your clarity steps in. It's the small gap where your brain catches up to your heartbeat and reminds you that you are in control, not your emotions. When you pause, you give yourself permission to breathe. Even a single breath can change the entire direction of a conversation or situation. That breath slows your heart rate, clears your thoughts, and gives your emotions a moment to settle before you make a move you might regret. Without that breath, Anger leads the conversation, fear guides the decision, impatience drives the reaction. But with the pause, your mind has space to look at the bigger picture. You begin to ask yourself questions you wouldn't ask in the heat of the moment. Is this worth my peace? What outcome do I want? Is this the right time to respond? These questions shift your reaction from emotional to intentional. Pausing also protects your relationships. So many arguments, misunderstandings, and broken connections could be avoided if people took even a few seconds to pause before speaking. Words said in anger may leave a wound that lasts long after the moment has passed. Actions taken out of frustration often create problems bigger than the one that triggered them. When you pause, you step out of the emotional storm and allow room for understanding, patience, and respect. You give yourself time to respond in a way that aligns with your values rather than your anger. You stop escalating the situation and begin guiding it toward resolution. The pause is not just for negative emotions, it's also for positive ones. Sometimes excitement or eagerness can lead you to make promises you can't keep, take risks without thinking, or rush into decisions that aren't right for you. Pausing doesn't kill the emotion, it organizes it. It allows you to celebrate or feel joy while still using judgment. You start responding not just with your heart, but with your head as well. Another powerful aspect of pausing is that it teaches discipline. Every time you pause before reacting, you train your mind to stay steady under pressure. You build emotional muscle. The situations that once triggered you begin to lose their power because you've learned how to master the moment instead of letting the moment master you. Over time, people notice the difference. You become a person who doesn't break under stress, who handles challenges with grace, who doesn't let small things pull you off balance. That reputation opens doors and builds trust. The pause is simple, but it's not easy. It takes awareness to notice the rising emotion, strength to resist the impulse, and patience to choose a better response. Yet the reward is enormous. In that brief moment of stillness, you find the ability to shape your future, protect your relationships, and rise above situations that once controlled you. The pause becomes your power, your protection, and ultimately, your peace. Surrounding yourself with positive, grounded people is one of the most important influences on your emotional stability because the company you keep quietly shapes your thoughts, your attitudes, and the way you handle life. Whether you realize it or not, the people around you affect the way you speak, the way you react, and even the way you think about yourself. Human beings naturally absorb the energy of their environment. If you spend time around people who are calm, supportive, respectful, and focused, you begin to reflect those qualities. But if your everyday circle is filled with negativity, drama, anger, or constant chaos, those emotions will slowly become part of your normal life. You might tell yourself you're strong enough not to be influenced, but influence doesn't always shout, it often whispers. You feel it through habits, tone of voice, mindset, and behavior. Positive and grounded people help you create emotional balance without even trying. When you're stressed or upset, they bring perspective instead of panic. They encourage you to slow down instead of explode. They remind you of who you are, not just how you feel in the moment. They show you through their own behavior how to stay centered in the middle of chaos. Being around people who know how to handle pressure teaches you to handle pressure. Being around people who talk solutions instead of problems teaches you to shift from worrying to problem solving. That influence builds emotional maturity because you're constantly surrounded by examples of how how to respond thoughtfully instead of impulsively. On the other hand, people filled with negativity drain your emotional strength. If your circle is full of gossip, complaining, bitterness, or explosive reactions, you start absorbing that energy without noticing. You find yourself reacting quickly, criticizing more, or getting irritated over small things. Emotional turbulence becomes normal. These kinds of environments feed anxiety, anger, insecurity, and impulsiveness. You might think you're just sharing space, but you're actually sharing emotions. It becomes harder to control your feelings because you're always surrounded by tension. Even when you're calm internally, the external negativity chips away at that peace. Rounded people also hold you accountable in the best way. They don't hype up your anger or encourage your worst impulses. Instead, they challenge you gently, reminding you to think before you act. They call out your behavior without blaming your character. They help you see when you're overreacting or letting emotions take over. This kind of accountability is rare, but it's powerful. It makes you better. It makes you wiser. It keeps you from falling into emotional traps. A positive circle also supports your growth. Instead of feeding your doubts, they feed your confidence. Instead of inflaming conflicts, they help you find calm. Instead of amplifying emotional pain, they help you heal. They celebrate genuinely, listen deeply, and speak with intention. Over time, being around people like this reshapes how you see the world and how you show up in it. You begin to prioritize peace over drama. You start wanting less chaos and more clarity. You notice that you react differently, you communicate healthier, and you recover faster from emotional challenges. Choosing who you spend time with is not about judging people, it's about protecting your peace. Your emotional well-being is too valuable to be handed over to those who thrive on disturbance. When you surround yourself with grounded, positive individuals, you begin to rise to their level. You grow, you calm, you center yourself, and you gain the emotional strength to navigate life with clarity and control. Replacing emotional impulses with intentional actions is one of the most transformative habits a person can develop because it shifts your entire life from reaction to direction. Emotional impulses show up suddenly, often with great intensity, driven by whatever you feel in that moment. When you're angry, the impulse is to yell or lash out. When you're hurt, the impulse is to withdraw or shut down. When you're anxious, the impulse is to avoid or overthink. These impulses feel urgent, as if you must act immediately. But impulses rarely lead to outcomes that match your long-term goals or values. They serve the emotion, not your future. Intentional actions, on the other hand, come from clarity, purpose, and thought. They are not ruled by the moment, they are guided by wisdom. Learning to replace impulse with intention begins with recognizing that acting quickly is not the same as acting correctly. Many people confuse speed with strength. They believe responding instantly makes them decisive. But real strength is the ability to pause, evaluate, and choose the action that leads to growth instead of damage. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens every time you tell yourself, I don't have to act on this feeling right now. That single awareness opens the door for intention. It gives you space to ask yourself what outcome you want, rather than what your emotion wants. Intentional action means responding with the future in mind. When you feel anger rising, intention asks, what will actually solve this problem? When you feel hurt, intention asks, how can I communicate this without causing more pain? When you feel overwhelmed, intention asks, what is the next step that will help me move forward? The emotion might want to explode, withdraw, or procrastinate, but intention guides your choices that build stability instead of chaos. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. Replacing impulses. It also protects your relationships. Emotional impulses often lead to saying things you don't mean, making decisions you later regret, or taking actions that create wounds. But intentional behavior allows you to express emotions without destroying trust. It helps you communicate clearly instead of defensively. It helps you listen, understand, and create solutions instead of adding fuel to conflict. People begin to see you as someone who is steady, reliable, and emotionally intelligent. Your presence becomes calming instead of unpredictable. Another important aspect of choosing intention is learning to separate feeling from action. You can feel angry without acting angry. You can feel scared without acting scared. You can feel insecure without acting in ways that betray your confidence. Emotions are valid, but they do not dictate who you have to be in that moment. Intentional living means letting emotions inform you, not control you. It means responding with who you want to become, not who the moment is pressuring you to be. Over time, intentional actions build a life you can be proud of. They create discipline, consistency, trust, and inner peace. You start experiencing fewer regrets because you're no longer making choices based on temporary emotions. You begin to feel empowered rather than controlled. You handle challenges with clarity, communicate with purpose, and face life with maturity. Replacing emotional impulses with intentional actions becomes the foundation of emotional mastery, guiding you toward a stronger, calmer, and more resilient version of yourself. Growth comes from learning, not exploding, and this simple truth is often overlooked in the heat of emotion. Every emotional reaction carries a lesson if we are willing to look for it. But most people let the intensity of the moment blind them. When someone insults you, cuts you off, or challenges you, your first instinct might be to lash out, defend yourself, or hold a grudge. That is the explosive response, the reaction that feels satisfying in the short term, but leaves long-term consequences in its wake. It's easy, it's automatic, and it gives you a temporary release, but it does not build strength or understanding. True growth comes when you take that same situation, pause, and ask yourself what it can teach you. Every conflict, disappointment, and emotional upheaval is a chance to learn something about yourself, someone else, or life itself. Learning instead of exploding requires humility. It requires admitting that you don't know everything and that you are still a work in progress. Exploding comes from ego, from thinking that your way is the only way, or that your feelings must be validated by others immediately. Learning comes from curiosity, from willingness to step back and observe. It comes when asking questions like, why did this affect me so much? What can I do differently next time? Or how can I turn this moment into a lesson rather than a fight? These questions transform the situation from a battle into an opportunity. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes to look for the lesson rather than the conflict. Exploding is instant, but learning is intentional. When you choose to respond thoughtfully, you give yourself the space to understand your triggers and patterns. You begin to notice the underlying causes of your emotional reactions, whether it's insecurity, pride, fear, or past experiences. Understanding these causes allows you to act with clarity and wisdom, instead of being a slave to your impulses. Growth is not just about avoiding mistakes. It's about understanding why mistakes happen, correcting them, and using the experience to improve your future behavior. Each time you handle a difficult situation calmly, Each time you pause instead of shout, each time you choose reflection over reaction, you are growing stronger emotionally. Learning also requires patience, because growth rarely happens overnight. Explosions might give you immediate satisfaction, but they don't teach you lasting skills. Learning demands persistence, repeated practice, and the willingness to fail without giving up. It's about handling one difficult conversation at a time, responding to one emotional trigger at a time, and gradually building a pattern of thoughtful behavior. With every intentional response, you are training yourself to navigate life more effectively. You develop resilience, the kind that allows you to face challenges without being overwhelmed by them. You begin to see emotional storms as opportunities to strengthen, not threats to your peace. Another key element of learning is reflection. After an emotional moment, taking time to analyze what happened is crucial. What triggered the reaction? Could the response have been different? What could have been learned from the interaction? Reflecting without judgment allows you to extract wisdom rather than guilt. It turns mistakes into stepping stones. It transforms emotional pain into insight. Over time, this practice rewires the brain. You become someone who naturally approaches challenges with curiosity and composure rather than anger or panic. Reflection turns experiences into teachers, making each day a chance to improve. Learning instead of exploding also impacts relationships profoundly. People notice when you respond with calmness, thoughtfulness, and understanding. Explosions damage trust, hurt feelings, and create distance. Learning builds bridges. It fosters communication, empathy, and mutual respect. Others feel safe around you, and you create a network of relationships built on maturity rather than conflict. You become the person who faces difficulties with poise, who adapts to challenges with intelligence, and who grows stronger from every experience. Ultimately, choosing to learn rather than explode transforms your life. It shifts your mindset from victimhood to ownership, from chaos to clarity, from reaction to mastery. Emotional growth is a lifelong journey, and every moment offers a choice to react immediately with intensity or to pause, reflect, and learn. When you embrace learning over exploding, you build resilience, wisdom, and self-control. You shape a life defined by understanding rather than regret, by strength rather than impulsivity, and by the knowledge that every experience, no matter how difficult, carries the potential for growth. This choice, to grow instead of explode, is the cornerstone of emotional intelligence, the secret to lasting peace, and the path to becoming the best version of yourself.